The sound of desperate breaths echoed through the storm, harsh and heavy against the roar of crashing waves. A large form floundered in the water, its enormous body straining against the current. A whale. The animal's body was battered, scarred by the cruel nets that had entangled it. Struggling against its injuries and the relentless tide, it let out an agonized cry, a sound of pure distress, unheard in the cacophony of nature's fury. The rescuers had been tracking it for days, hoping against hope that they could reach it before the sea claimed it. But now, with the storm worsening, every second counted. Their boat rocked violently as the waves pounded it, but they had no choice but to press on. This whale, broken, bleeding, and gasping for survival, was running out of time. So were they. The storm didn't let up. The wind howled relentlessly as the boat pushed forward, each wave more daunting than the last. One rescuer clutched the side of the boat, their face set in grim determination. "We're close," they shouted over the roaring wind, their voice barely audible. The other rescuer nodded, their hands steady on the rope. The whale, its body weakening, thrashed in the water, fighting against the inevitable pull of the ocean. "We need to move faster," the first rescuer said, their voice urgent. They had no time to waste. The animal's life hung in the balance, and every second felt like a lifetime. They were almost there, but the storm was pushing back, as if nature itself was determined to claim the whale's life. Finally, the boat was close enough. The two rescuers prepared the rescue equipment, ready to deploy it at the right moment. They had practiced this 100 times, but this was different. This whale wasn't just an animal. They both knew that in saving it, they might be saving something far more important: their belief in themselves, their ability to right the wrongs done to wildlife. One rescuer's heart raced as they threw a glance at their partner. "Are you ready?" they asked, their voice steady but betraying a hint of uncertainty. The other rescuer met their gaze, nodding without hesitation. "Let's do this." They both knew the risks, but the animal's survival depended on them. There was no turning back now. The moment the gear touched the whale, everything seemed to freeze. One rescuer's hands were shaking slightly, but they couldn't afford to let fear win now. The whale let out a low, mournful sound, its body shifting under the strain. The tension in the air was palpable as they struggled to attach the rescue equipment without hurting it further. The second rescuer quickly moved to their side, helping them adjust the straps. "It's going to be okay," they reassured. But the first rescuer wasn't sure. The storm was worsening, and the current was pulling them further from the shore. But there was no time to hesitate. They had to save the whale, or all their efforts would be for nothing. With a final tug, the equipment clicked into place. Now, they just had to get the whale to safety. With the whale finally secured, the rescuers worked together to pull it away from the dangerous rocks where it had been stranded. The storm was still relentless, but now there was hope. The whale was alive, still fighting, still breathing. But the journey to safety wasn't over. The ocean was unforgiving, and they had to navigate through the storm, their path uncertain. As the whale slowly started to move, pulling against the ropes with newfound strength, one rescuer whispered, "We're almost there." But with every surge of hope came another wave of doubt. Would they make it in time? Or was the storm going to take them all under before they could reach shore? As the storm slowly receded, the boat finally found calmer waters. The whale, exhausted but still alive, floated gently beside the vessel. The rescuers worked swiftly, carefully assessing its injuries. One rescuer ran their hands over the whale's scarred body, their heart heavy with the toll the animal had endured. "We're going to get you through this," they whispered, as if speaking directly to the creature. The other rescuer was focused on stabilizing the boat, but their eyes kept flickering to the whale. There was something deeply personal about this rescue, something more than the work itself. The ocean had taken so much from both of them, but now they had the chance to give back. "We can't lose it," one rescuer said, a quiet determination in their voice. The other rescuer nodded, their jaw tight. "We won't." The whale's injuries were severe, and it was clear that the creature had been trapped for far too long. As the rescuers worked, One rescuer found themselves thinking back to their own past. They had been in similar pain, struggling to survive, to find a way out of darkness. They had been the one no one believed in, the one who had to fight for a second chance. Now, standing over this wounded whale, they understood the creature's struggle in ways they hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about saving the whale, it was about redemption. They had their own scars, their own story, and this whale was a symbol of everything they had fought to overcome. "We're not giving up," they said, their voice steady but filled with emotion. The sound of the waves gently lapping against the boat was the only thing that could be heard now. The storm had passed, but the danger was far from over. As the rescuers worked, they realized the whale wasn't just injured. It was broken, emotionally and physically. It had been through too much. They had to act quickly, but compassionately. One rescuer looked at the other, their voice filled with concern. "Can it make it? Can we save it?" they asked, their eyes searching. The answer was unclear, but they had to try. "We don't know yet," came the quiet reply, "but we can't stop now." In that moment, they both understood that this wasn't just about the whale. It was about them too. They had come too far, and they wouldn't let anything, no matter how overwhelming, stop them. Hours passed, and despite the initial signs of progress, the whale's condition was still critical. One rescuer had grown quieter over the course of the day, their gaze often wandering to the horizon, lost in thought. The bond between them and the whale had deepened, an unspoken understanding forged in the shared struggle for survival. As they adjusted the ropes to secure the whale more comfortably, the rescuer spoke softly, as if to the animal itself. "I know you're tired," they said, "but we're with you. You don't have to face this alone." The other rescuer glanced at them, a silent acknowledgement of the truth in those words. The whale, though exhausted, seemed to relax slightly at the touch. The storm had passed, but a different kind of battle had begun, one that would test both the human spirit and the animal's will to survive. As night fell, the rescuers settled into an uneasy silence. The task wasn't over, but the worst of the storm had passed. The whale had survived the worst of its ordeal, and now the real challenge was to help it heal. One rescuer sat at the boat's edge, their legs dangling into the water, their hands resting on the ropes that kept the whale secure. "We'll get you back to the shore," they said quietly. "You're not alone in this anymore." The calm night wrapped around them, the only sound the soft lapping of the water against the boat. They knew the journey ahead would be long, but they had come this far. Together, they would see it through. As the days passed, the whale's condition improved, but the storm's aftermath lingered. The boat had been delayed due to damage from the storm, and now the rescuers faced a new challenge, getting the whale to a safer location. One rescuer looked at the dwindling supplies. "We're running out of time," they said, their voice laced with frustration. "We need to get back to shore, and fast." The other rescuer nodded, knowing the risks. "The storm's damage to the boat is worse than we thought," they replied, their gaze focused on the horizon. "If we don't move soon, we won't make it." The stakes had grown higher. There was no time for delay. The whale's health was fragile, and the journey back was fraught with uncertainty. With the storm behind them, the boat finally set off, but the journey was far from easy. The ocean had calmed, but the uncertainty ahead loomed like a dark cloud. One rescuer adjusted the ropes holding the whale, their eyes scanning the open water for signs of danger. "We need to make it through the channel before nightfall," they said, their voice tense with urgency. The other rescuer nodded, but their face was drawn, a mixture of concern and determination. "We'll make it," they replied, though they both knew the risks. The ocean was unpredictable, and the storm had left behind a trail of debris in the water. The whale was growing weaker again, and the boat was still in danger. They had to move quickly and carefully. Hours passed, and the sea remained unforgiving. The boat's engine sputtered, and one rescuer's gaze drifted to the horizon, searching for signs of land. "We should have seen the coastline by now," they said, their voice edged with fear. "If we don't find shelter soon, we'll be out of fuel." The other rescuer checked the fuel gauge again, their lips pressed together in frustration. "We're not far from the shore," they replied, though their voice betrayed their uncertainty. The whale, growing weaker with each passing hour, had to be their priority. "We can't lose the whale now," they said, more to themselves than to their partner. Time was running out, and they were racing against more than just the storm. It was the whale's life, and every passing minute brought them closer to a breaking point. As the boat limped forward, the ocean suddenly shifted. One rescuer spotted something in the distance, a large mass of debris drifting toward them. "It's a shipping container," they shouted, pointing to the floating wreckage. The boat was heading directly toward it, and they had no time to steer away. The other rescuer gripped the wheel, trying to maneuver the boat around the debris, but it was too late. The boat scraped against the wreckage, sending a jolt through the hull. "Hold on!" they yelled as the whale flinched, caught in the sudden turbulence. The boat was damaged further, and the risk of capsizing increased. "We have to stabilize the whale now," the rescuer shouted, adrenaline surging. But the injury was more than just physical. The storm had changed everything, and now the real fight was beginning. The boat had taken on water, and the damage was significant. One rescuer worked quickly to secure the whale, their hands shaking as they attached the last of the ropes. The boat rocked with the waves, but there was no turning back now. "It's not over yet," they said, their voice tight with determination. "We just need to get to shore." The other rescuer nodded, though the weight of their words hung heavy. The journey wasn't over. They still had to get the whale to safety, but now the sea felt more like an enemy than ever before. The ocean was testing them, pushing them to the brink, but they had no choice but to keep going. Failure wasn't an option. Not now. The boat, battered and struggling, continued its journey toward shore. Despite the wreckage, the rescuers were determined to save the whale, but doubt had begun to creep in. One rescuer could feel the weight of their own exhaustion, the pressure mounting with each passing moment. "We're not going to make it, are we?" they asked, their voice cracking. The other rescuer glanced at them, their expression unreadable. "We have to make it," they replied, though the uncertainty in their voice mirrored the growing fear in their eyes. But just as the tension reached its peak, the whale gave a strange, mournful sound. One rescuer froze. "Did you hear that?" They looked over, but the whale was no longer visible in the water. The truth was sinking in. It wasn't just the storm they had to fight, it was the animal's own fate. As they reached the shore, a hidden truth began to surface. The first rescuer had spent their life rescuing animals, always driven by the belief that saving a life meant everything. But as they looked down at the whale, they realized something they hadn't before. This whale wasn't just any animal. It had been a captive, an escaped prisoner from a distant port. The other rescuer noticed their gaze and asked, "What's wrong?" The first rescuer hesitated, then whispered, "This whale, it was a pet once." A moment of silence passed between them. The weight of the realization hung in the air, heavy with regret and disbelief. This wasn't a case of nature in need of saving. It was a rescue born of human mistakes. The stakes had changed. Now, the rescue wasn't just about saving a whale. It was about fixing a wrong that had been done long ago. The revelation about the whale's past weighed heavily on the rescuers, but they had no time to dwell on it. As they prepared the whale for transport, a new challenge emerged. The first rescuer noticed something strange, marks on the whale's skin, not just from nets but from human-made scars. The cruelty of what it had endured became clearer. "Who would do this?" they murmured, their voice thick with disbelief. The second rescuer turned, sensing the anger building in their partner. "Not now," they said. "We need to focus on getting it to safety first." But the first rescuer couldn't let it go. "We need to know who did this, who hurt it." The rage, which had always been buried under their calm exterior, was rising. The rescue had become a personal crusade, not just for the animal, but for the fight against the people who had caused its suffering. As they moved the whale to a safer area for medical attention, the first rescuer couldn't shake the anger. "This isn't just an accident, it's deliberate," they muttered, voice tight. The second rescuer, while still focused on the whale, asked, "What are you saying?" The first rescuer stopped and turned to them. The whale was likely part of an illegal pet trade. It was taken from the wild, abused, and left to die. We're not just rescuing an animal. We're uncovering something bigger. The weight of the discovery hit them both hard. They had thought the danger was only the storm, the sea, and the whale's injuries, but now they understood that the real threat was the cruelty of humanity, and it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. As the night grew darker, one rescuer sat alone, the events of the day weighing heavily on their mind. They had thought they were simply helping an injured whale, but now they realized that the problem was much larger. The second rescuer approached them, sitting down silently beside them. "What now?" they asked. The first rescuer paused, looking out over the sea. "Now, we finish what we started," they replied. "We've got a whale to save, but we also have to stop this from happening again." The resolve in their voice was clear. They couldn't undo the damage that had been done, but they could prevent more suffering. That was all that mattered now. The storm had passed, but the tension hadn't. With the whale now stable, the rescuers knew the real test was yet to come. The journey to the nearest sanctuary was still long, and the ocean, though calmer, was unpredictable. The first rescuer paced back and forth on the boat, checking the ropes securing the whale. "We can't afford any more setbacks," they muttered under their breath. The second rescuer, watching from the helm, nodded. "We're ready," they said, though their voice didn't sound as confident as the words. The storm had taken its toll, both on the whale and on them. The distance was daunting, and they were running out of time. It was now or never. They had to keep going, no matter what. They were nearly there, the coast just visible on the horizon, when disaster struck. A rogue wave, unexpected and violent, slammed into the side of the boat. The force of the water knocked both rescuers off their feet, sending the boat spinning in the chaos. The whale let out a terrified cry, its body thrashing. The first rescuer grabbed the side of the boat, struggling to hold on. "Hold on," they shouted, their heart racing. The second rescuer, injured from the fall, struggled to regain control of the boat. The whale was panicking. Everything that had been carefully built now teetered on the brink of collapse. "We can't lose it now," the second rescuer grunted, forcing the boat back on course. But the storm had taken one last shot. Would they survive it? As the boat steadied, the first rescuer's heart raced. The whale was still alive, but only just. The storm had taken more from it than they could have anticipated, and now the race against time was more urgent than ever. The second rescuer checked the whale's condition. "It's weak, but it's holding on," they said, their voice strained. "We're almost there." The urgency in their voice was unmistakable. The coast was close, but the whale's survival depended on how quickly they could reach shelter. They had been tested in every possible way, but now the final challenge awaited. "We need to push through," the first rescuer said, determination cutting through the fear. "Just a little more." But as the boat moved forward, the storm's lingering effects threatened to turn the final stretch into a nightmare. The final stretch was the most dangerous. As the boat neared the shore, the second rescuer looked back at the whale, their heart pounding. "We're not out of the woods yet," they said, their voice tight. The coast was within reach, but the water here was shallow and full of hidden obstacles. One wrong move, and they could lose everything. The first rescuer nodded, scanning the water ahead. "We've come this far," they said. "We can't stop now." But just as they thought they were safe, the boat jolted unexpectedly. An underwater rock had nearly capsized them. The whale let out another low cry, and the urgency of the situation hit them both like a hammer. "We've got to get this right," the first rescuer said. "There's no time to waste." With a final push, the boat reached the shallow waters near the sanctuary. The rescuers breathed a collective sigh of relief, but the job wasn't over yet. The first rescuer quickly moved to untie the ropes that secured the whale, their hands shaking with exhaustion. "It's almost over," they whispered, their voice filled with both relief and disbelief. The second rescuer steadied the boat as the whale was gently guided toward the safety of the sanctuary. The moment of truth had arrived. Would the whale survive? As they watched it slowly swim away, the tension that had been building for days finally began to melt away. But there was still a part of them that knew the journey wasn't over, not for the whale, and not for them. The boat sat anchored near the shore, the sun now rising over the horizon. The first rescuer leaned against the side of the boat, gazing out at the whale as it swam toward the open sea. The battle wasn't over, but for now, the animal was free. "We did it," the second rescuer said quietly, their voice full of exhaustion. The first rescuer didn't respond right away, their gaze still fixed on the whale. The journey had been grueling, emotionally draining, and they'd been tested in ways they had never imagined. But now, as they watched the whale break through the surf, they felt a sense of peace settle in their chest. "We saved it," the first rescuer finally whispered, their voice steady. "We saved it together." As the boat finally turned back toward the mainland, the two rescuers remained silent, lost in their thoughts. The ocean that had once felt like an enemy now seemed to hold a new meaning. The first rescuer looked at the calm waters ahead. "I never thought I'd see this day," they said softly. The second rescuer nodded, their expression reflecting a mixture of relief and sadness. "Neither did I," they replied. The journey had been harder than they'd anticipated. They had come close to losing everything, yet somehow they had come through. "We gave it everything," the first rescuer said, their voice tinged with emotion. "And it was worth it." There was no going back now. The whale had found its freedom, and so, in a way, had they. As the boat neared the shore, the first rescuer couldn't help but reflect on everything they had gone through. The losses, the dangers, the moments of doubt. They had faced it all. And now, standing on the shore, they felt the weight of their actions. "Do you think we did enough?" the second rescuer asked quietly. The question hung in the air, unanswered. The first rescuer stood still, staring out at the ocean. "I think we did," they said softly. "But the real question is, will we ever stop trying?" The realization hit them both. The rescue was never truly over. There would always be another animal in need, another call for help. The cycle would continue, but for now they had made a difference. Later, as the two rescuers stood at the edge of the shore, watching the waves lap against the sand, they spoke little. The weight of the past few days had left them both physically and emotionally drained, but there was something else now, a quiet sense of fulfillment. The first rescuer turned to the second rescuer, their face softening. "I couldn't have done it without you," they said simply. The other rescuer met their gaze, a slight smile tugging at their lips. "You didn't have to," they replied. "We were in this together." There was no grand speech, no overt display of emotion. Instead, there was an unspoken understanding between them. They had done something extraordinary, but it was the simple, quiet act of saving another life that mattered most. As the sun set on their final day at the coast, the two rescuers shared a moment of quiet reflection. The first rescuer looked down at the water, their thoughts far away. "It's not always going to be like this," they said, their voice distant. "Some days, it's just too much to bear." The second rescuer nodded, understanding. "But we still do it," they replied, their voice firm. "Because we have to." For them. The two stood there for a while, watching the horizon as the last light of the day faded. The whale was gone, safe and free, but the journey wasn't over. There would always be another rescue, another life to save, and they would be ready. The air was still as the two rescuers stood in silence on the beach, watching the waves roll in. The day had come to an end, but the weight of what they'd experienced seemed to linger. The first rescuer turned to the second rescuer, their voice soft. "Do you ever wonder if we'll ever truly be done?" The second rescuer didn't reply right away. Instead, they took a deep breath, looking at the ocean with a knowing gaze. "I don't think we're meant to be finished," they said finally. "There's always another one, another fight." It was a bittersweet realization. They had saved a life today, but there would always be more lives in need. As the sun dipped below the horizon, they both knew one thing for sure. They would keep fighting. Because they had to. For the animals, for the world, for themselves. As the night settled in, the rescuers made their way back to the boat. There was no grand celebration, no final words to sum up their journey. It was just them, the boat, and the open water. The first rescuer looked out at the water one last time, a deep sense of closure settling over them. "We did it," they said quietly. The second rescuer nodded, standing beside them. "We did," they agreed, their voice steady. The air around them was thick with the kind of silence that only comes after a long, hard battle. It wasn't a victory they could shout about, but it was one they would carry with them forever. The boat drifted gently as the night unfolded. The second rescuer looked up at the stars, their thoughts distant. "Sometimes I think we're just a small part of something much bigger," they said. The first rescuer glanced over at them. "What do you mean?" "I mean," the second rescuer continued, "we do this work day in and day out. But sometimes I wonder if the real impact is in the ripple effect. Saving one life might not change the world, but it might change someone else's world. Someone who needed to see that it's possible to make a difference." The first rescuer thought about it for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right," they said. "It's not about the fame or the glory. It's about knowing you did the right thing when it mattered." As they neared the shore, the first rays of dawn began to break across the horizon. The first rescuer looked at the shoreline, their expression contemplative. "It's hard to leave this place," they said quiet. The second rescuer nodded, understanding. "But we'll come back when we're needed," they replied. "Nah, it's what we do, what we're meant to do." The first rescuer let out a deep breath, the weight of the journey finally lifting. "Yeah," they said, "it's what we do." As the boat glided back toward the shore, they both knew that their work was far from over, but they had given everything they had in this moment. And for now, that was enough. The boat finally reached the shore, the sun now fully risen. As they stepped onto the sand, the first rescuer took one last look at the water, a small smile forming on their lips. "We'll be back," they said, the words quiet but filled with conviction. The second rescuer nodded, their eyes soft with understanding. "I know," they replied. Together they walked away from the boat, their footprints leaving marks in the sand that would soon be washed away by the waves. But they knew that their actions had left something more lasting behind, a ripple of change that would echo through the world, no matter how small.